Welcome to another episode of the podcast Analytics Unfiltered Conversations that Cut Through the Noise. I'm your host, Maggie Wolf, and in this episode, I'm joined by Chris Byington, who has been in analytics for 15 years, including leading data teams at multiple startups and tech companies. We talked about how analytics has changed over the past 15 years and what teams look like today. Of course, we talked about AI, but what I found refreshing was our conversation was very candid around how AI is helping analytics teams and not replacing jobs. We also talked about what Chris looks for when hiring, and it isn't necessarily the most advanced technical skills. Hope you enjoyed this episode.
Great. So I'm joined by Chris, who is currently a VP of Analytics at Superhuman Mail, which recently merged with Grammarly under the name Superhuman. Hopefully that was an exciting change for you. Having
Definitely.
having gone through acquisitions myself, I know they can be, learning experiences for sure. But welcome and thank you for meeting with me and chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
Yeah. So you've spent 15 years building and leading analytics teams across different environments, including consulting, tech, and startups. What has changed the most about the role of analytics since you started your career?
I think the thing that's changed the most, I think there's probably two things that come to mind for me. The real answer is like so much, but so little at the same time. The first thing that's changed that comes to mind is I feel like the role of data science teams and analytics teams is much better understood today than it was 15 years ago. 15 years ago was like, what is this data team? Not all companies have a data team. And like, what questions am I supposed to ask them? That was actually one of the reasons that I left one of my first, data jobs was the role was misunderstood. It lived within finance, and we felt like we were hitting a ceiling. And I feel like today it's sort of the expectation that you have a data team and a product analytics team within that and everything, and people kind of know the questions to ask and how to partner, which has been really amazing. On the other hand, like maybe if I were to give like a little bit of a spicy take, it also removes like some of the magic. Like I feel like 15 years ago when you joined a company as a data scientist, people were like, "Oh my God, it's like this beautiful magician and they can do anything," and like I'm scared. That was the
Hmm.
vibe that I got at least. Um and so now the expectations are higher. And so it's exciting to meet them.
Yeah. No, it's funny you say like a lot has changed, but a lot hasn't. I've been thinking a lot about how at one point in my career, I was not in this role, but I worked for a hospital system that had like decision support, I think was the name of the team.
Yep.
And I feel like that's just been rebranded into, analytics or data science or whatever. But I feel like ultimately a lot of our job is aiding with decision support. So
Yeah,
it's like
totally.
what has really changed? Um, not much, but kind of like going into that, things have changed and things have been renamed and expectations have changed. As someone who's led teams and presumably like been the one to say like this is what we do as a data analytics team, how do you determine what an analytics function should be within a company?
Yeah. I think to me, I think what you're alluding to is within Superhuman. I lead the kind of core data, but then also like planning and goal setting as part of it, and then FP&A. We happen to have those under the same umbrella, and that's been super powerful for us. But it's not going to work in every environment. I think what it comes back to is I usually think about it in terms of jobs to be done. Like, what are the jobs to be done that the company has? What are the things that they want to use data for? And that importantly, you have to anchor yourself not just to like what would be interesting or compelling or help people grow in their careers, although that's obviously important, but you need to anchor to like what will help the business grow and what will help improve outcomes for the business and for customers. And if you anchor to those jobs to be done, then typically it helps to kind of craft the organization and figure out what should be within your purview. Um, excuse me. I do think it needs to start with like, it's sort of like start at the end and work backwards with a really, really strong mission statement. It's like, hey, give me one sentence that says what you're here to accomplish and make sure that everyone can repeat it from memory. There can be like components of it that kind of sit below it as bullets or any other formatting, but ultimately you have to be really, really crisp on what you're trying to do. And so for us, our mission statement is kind of intentionally high level and broad because we touch a lot of different areas of the business. As I just mentioned before, it's use data to improve outcomes for customers and for the business. And we do that through data platform. We do that through democratization of data. We do that through goal planning, which is really about making sure everyone is aligned on what good looks like and then working towards it and prioritizing based on it. And then, of course, we do it as part of data science and product analytics to help us understand customers. So once you have that like anchor of like what you're here to do and why you exist, because you should have to justify your existence. A lot can come from it and it becomes much less ambiguous.
hmm I'm curious, have you ever been or like on like an embedded analytics team within like a functional team compared to what it sounds like your current team, which is probably similar to my team and the teams I've been on, which are more of like the data center of excellence kind of standalone team. I'm curious if you feel like, I mean, I feel like this kind of of excellence model seems to be like the best standard at teams that have like very like effective data teams, but I'm curious if you think there's anything we've lost by not being embedded in the teams we support.
I definitely think you lose something.
Mhm.
I think in my mind, there's probably two things that you lose. And I do think there's a middle ground, which I'll talk about in a sec. The first thing that you lose is just those deep stakeholder relationships.
hmm
It's hard to like replace like, hey, you know the person you're like on the same team, or at least it feels like you're on the same team and you're
Yeah.
rowing in the same direction and you like share goals rather than being a service model. And then the second is if you're not embedded, I think you do lose a lot of that like continuity of business context of like you get really deep, like it's really hard to jump in and work on a project and then jump back out. There's so much context around how different projects come together and the historical context of like what we've tried, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and being embedded allows you to have that and to I think to make better decisions.
hmm
A hybrid model that I've seen work well, that which is the model that we practice at Superhuman, is a hub and spoke model, where you have the central team, you have like platform teams that are horizontal, like the data platform team that does data engineering, that brings all of your data into one place, and then usually your kind of BI style team or like data culture team that's about tooling and that works across the business. But then you have vertical teams that are embedded with marketing, with product, with sales, et cetera. And we've found that to be really, really valuable. The way I typically think about embedding, because it's like, hey, which team are you on? You can't be on two teams. The way I think about it embedding is I tell the people, the team members, the data scientists who are embedding, that you're much more on the team you're embedding with than you are on our team, frankly. And you should be spending a minimum of 80% of your energy with that group. And so there's not much room for much else. And that's kind of the
hmm
point. So I found that to be super helpful. Is that kind of hub and spoke model where you can get, if you set it up right, which we have plenty of areas to grow, but if you set it up right, you can kind of get the best of both worlds.
hmm hmm Yeah, I think that that's like what I've seen is like even if there's like the central data team, there's usually most people are aligned to a specific part of the business, which I think helps a lot. Cool. Okay, so moving on, we of course have to talk about AI because like we wouldn't be good data scientists if we didn't talk about AI, or data people. Um, so AI, it's been interesting to see how quickly it's changed. I feel like when people ask about like even just thinking about the jobs and like how has an analytics role or data science role changed and like how are they going to change in the future? How can I future proof myself? It's just so crazy to think about just even going back like a couple of years, like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, just it's just completely changed the way we work. Like I even think about I finished my master's degree in data science in 2022, like before ChatGPT and all of that. And so I learned everything I learned without it. And so thinking about students now, it's like completely different. Sometimes I think that's like the first place they go to learn, which is scary. But in terms of what you think is actually like making significant changes, like which parts of an analyst or data science jobs do you think are being most meaningfully reshaped by AI?
In my mind right now, I think it's having like a very significant like positive effect. I think there's kind of two things that come to mind for me. One is the like clerical and admin work and everything that isn't the actual data science work. It's writing documents if you have like your prompts set up correctly. It's even like having like a virtual personal assistant that can help you with scheduling and getting meetings on the books and making things that you shouldn't have to process with your brain, like pushing those off onto a different system so you have the headspace to think really deeply. So that's been super powerful. I mean, that can easily save you half a day a week, something like that. And I think more importantly, it is about like instead of just time savings, it is, I think, about headspace. It's like giving you those longer focus blocks. So that's been super great. It's automating weekly updates. It's automating putting decks together when you already have the data, and things like that. So it's that kind of admin and lower level work. And then the second thing I think is abstracting away like again, I think the lower level work of the data work. it's like, hey, if you have to write, you know, 50 regexes or whatever, like the AI can do it for you instead of you needing to do it. I feel like that's the canonical example. If you need to draft a data pipeline and you have a very clear idea of what the scope is, you know, you need to have the scope yourself. But once you have it, like AI can do most of that work for you. Um, Building visualizations, adjusting visualizations, like once you have the problem really well framed and you know what decisions, you know, are going to be made based on it, it can, you know, take something that would have taken a couple hours and take, you know, 10 or 15 minutes of adjusting the prompt and going back and forth with Claude or ChatGPT. So I think that's been really powerful. And in my mind, what it's about is like helping data scientists and analysts focus more on like building those relationships with stakeholders, exerting influence, which I think is probably one of the hardest parts of the job. I don't think the
Mhm.
actual technical work is the hardest part of the job. I think that's the tool that enables the influence. And you said before, like decision support, you know, how many times have we almost anyone, I feel like, in the industry offered a suggestion for how to improve a product or a funnel or whatever, and you know you're met with the response like, well, it's not in the roadmap or whatever it is, like so frustrating. But when you do get the yes and you can see the impact, it's super impactful, and really powerful. So as much time as we can spend on that as possible, I think, in like solving those hard problems, I think is great,
Mhm.
and giving you more space to think about what are the existential questions in the business.
Mhm.
How can are we answering the right questions, asking and answering? I think that's probably the one of the biggest bottlenecks, and just giving more space for that focus time to do that work.
Mhm. Do you find as kind of these shifts are happening, do you see that like reducing the headcount or anything? Or do you feel like, because I feel like the teams I've been on, there's no shortage of work we can do. So this idea of like, well, now that you have AI, you don't need as many data analysts or data scientists. To me, that's laughable because I'm like, there's so many things on our backlog. Are you seeing something similar, or do you feel like we're going in the direction of we would need smaller teams?
No, I would definitely agree with that. I think there's like you said, there's no shortage of really impactful work. It's just a question of um, how much people can get through. I think for-profit businesses will always be resource and headcount constrained, and that's never going to change. That was true before AI. I think it's going to be true after AI. There's always going to be, you know, there's always going to be people thinking about these big questions. I think what AI changes is like the leverage and the like the amount of productivity and impact an individual person can have. I think like for the same team size, we're going to see and are now seeing data teams and teams of most disciplines have a much larger impact just because they're able to get to so much more work and think so
Mhm.
much more deeply about the problems.
Um, Another thing that I feel like is exploding is all of these like AI powered tools that like they democratize data access or they can like do BI for you or write your code for you. Do you think that these tools are actually able to do what they say, or do you think like we're still at the point of overselling kind of the problems we can solve?
Um, I think it depends like which area like which area you talk about. I think AI tools that can write the code for you, like absolutely, that's 100% happening. That's the reality that we're seeing, and I think that's amazing. Obviously, like Cloud Code is a great example. AI tools doing I think is less mature than you know the Cursors or the Cloud Codes of the world. Um, I I think we're probably like overselling where we are today, but not overselling like the promise in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some tools that can work quite well if they have access to a governed contextualized data set.
Hmm.
But I think like in you know natural language processing or an LLM that's just doing text to SQL, I think is close to useless, to be honest. Like the SQL in my mind is not the constraining factor. The constraining factor is like what is the semantic meaning of the data and how do you interpret it and how do you translate it into the question that you're trying to answer. And I think that does need to be configured by a human being, which means like, you know, semantic layers and that kind of stuff are just so much more important when you have
Hmm.
a programmatic system asking questions and issuing queries on the data as opposed to a human being, even more important. But I think if you have those, if you have a tool or whatever, whether it's DBT or something else that gives you that semantic model, I think it can
Hmm.
be super powerful. And we're doing some of that, more than scratching the surface, but less than like fully running with it. and we're seeing that work well today within Superhuman.
Hmm. Yeah, that leads me to another question around like, does our data need to change and like our data governance and like how we store our data, like does all of that need to change with AI? Because I feel like you definitely need to make sure your data is like cleaner and more accessible if you're building tools where like anyone can come in and use it and access it. But has that changed anything on the back end in like data engineering or data governance or anything like that?
I think it depends what you were doing, what people were doing before.
Mhm.
Um, For me, I'm definitely a big believer in like self-service and helping people answer most of their own questions on their own, like business stakeholders. And like, 5 or 7 years ago, what that looked like was like, just to use one example, was like a Looker style thing. And the big advent is like, hey, you no longer need to know SQL in order to query your business's data. You can just point and click, which is great. And now, AI can do that on top of your semantic model. I think if you want AI to be able to like really understand what your data means, you need to go ham on that semantic model and governance and giving it lots of context about what these fields mean. It's kind of like taking all of the little things that a data scientist would have in their head, where they're like, oh yeah, I need to filter by this or exclude this time range or remove this type of internal user that you just know to write each time. And you need to make that programmatic and you need to have that documented in a way that the AI can consume. And then I think from there it works really, really well. And so I think like every company and every data team is on that spectrum from like querying raw tables in the production system all the way to what I just described. And I think teams that want to take like the full advantage of the kind of AI accessing data and doing analysis based on it will probably need to move a lot further on that spectrum.
Hmm.
Cool thing that I'm excited about is that that will also benefit humans querying the data because you can
Yeah.
understand it better and you don't have to like, I think it's quicker even for data team members because you don't have to remember all those little filters. It just kind of works. But we haven't really had like a big structural forcing function to do that before.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it is exciting, like as, the primary users of a company's data, like knowing that it'll be better, hopefully. Like I just, joined my current role less than a year ago. And so like learning a company's data is always an interesting exercise and like learning all the nuances and how similar things are different from each other. And so, if that can like get cleaned up and be cleaner and easier to use for AI, then it'll be easier to use for us. And it'll be interesting to see how much more productive we can be and like new hires, how much more quickly they can get up and running. Um, yeah, I like that. So last question about AI, we already kind of touched on this like fear that people have that AI is going to replace data analysts or replace data scientists. Um, and since that won't be happening, what skills do you think we should be focusing on more? Now that we have AI to help us and to kind of change the way we work, what like human skills do you think we need to be doubling down on or improving even more?
Yeah. I think I think there's two things there. The first one is what I would call like problem framing or prioritization is thinking about, cool,
Mhm.
now that like when I think about like doing analysis or well, almost like any function in a business, it's a question of where is the bottleneck? And for a long time, the bottleneck has been like, cool, we asked this question. Now it's going to take an analyst like a week of elapsed time to answer it. And then we're going to have a discussion and then there's going to be more questions. And now that week is condensed down in the, take like the hypothetical example of AI doing the analysis. The week is condensed down to like 90 minutes if you do like a couple different prompts to get the answer. So now that's no longer the bottleneck. So what is the bottleneck? In my opinion, it shifts to, are you asking the right questions? Are you asking the questions that are the most important for the business that the business will actually act on? Like if you could answer 50 questions in one day, like how many of them, now that that's like not the issue, how many of them actually get answered? How many, this is a classic thing. It's like how many of the dashboards actually get used 3 months
Mhm.
after they're built? And how do you focus your data team on directly driving business value, like for the business and helping you grow revenue and profit, and then also for customers? And how do you make sure you're orienting yourself around the problems that the people who are making decisions, which most of the time, but not always, is your executive team, your C-suite, in making sure you're answering those questions so that they can make better quality decisions. So to me, that's actually really, really hard um, to do in a in a really positive way and to do well. I think data teams typically do quite well at like solving point problems. How do you evaluate this A/B test? How do you understand the launch of this feature, et cetera, et cetera. But when you think about your executive team at your annual planning offsite and they're making strategic decisions like which
Hmm.
projects should exist, it really scares me how little data sometimes factors into those decisions. And I think that merits way, way more time from data teams relative
Hmm.
to where we are today in the industry.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. So continuing the conversation on like skills, but kind of changing off of AI. So thinking more like you've, led data teams at multiple companies. What do you look for when hiring, and how is this different for like an early career versus a senior level candidate?
Yeah, I think I like the things I look for are mostly like meta things rather than specific skills, or specific like technical skills, I should say.
Hmm.
Um, The first one is the right kind of ambition, which I think some people call
Hmm.
like having batteries included. Is like, hey, is this person truly motivated and energized on their own
Hmm.
by solving problems for the business and moving the business forward? And you can usually see that by like the tone and the way that people talk about projects that they led end to end. It's like, cool. Are you excited about the impact this had on customers? Are you excited about how this helped your stakeholders? Are you excited about how this moved the business, your data team forward and improved tooling and everything like that? And just like people have it or they don't.
Hmm.
I think that that is typically quite difficult to influence. It's like you either care about something or you don't. And so I definitely look for that. Those people are going to be the people jumping in, being proactive, et cetera.
Hmm.
And I think it's like a minority of people. So that's one thing I look for. And then the second thing is I look for coachability. Everyone has their strengths and then also areas where they can grow. I have many, many, many areas myself where I can grow, and I get a ton of feedback from my boss, which is great, and I look out for. And I like really want that feedback. So the question is not, are you landing the perfect person with the perfect skills in the seat?
Hmm.
But are you landing someone who is intelligent, who wants to do the right thing for the business, which is about the level of ambition and the right kind of ambition? And then three, someone who can genuinely take feedback, where you can have a collaboration where you can help them grow and help them increase their impact. Those are really the two things. There's like there's like the skills that are like you need to have in order to succeed at
Hmm.
the job, but those are
Yeah.
typically much easier to test for. And then in terms of like you mentioned early career versus later career,
Hmm.
I think like the motivation piece I think is important at any stage, but just earlier career there's like less to go on in terms of someone's experience, so that just the motivation and ambition becomes more important. Later career, I think a big change that I look for, and that I like increase the emphasis on is just project examples. I You typically can learn a lot, and when I interview people, I typically start with like a question of just walk me through end to end a project that you worked on. Like, why did you do it? How did you do it? What was the impact? Like, was it successful and how did you evaluate that? What did you learn? What would you do differently next
Hmm.
time? That tells you so much about how someone thinks
Hmm.
about something and how they take pride in their work. And I think having those demonstrative proof points, even like on the resume before you interview someone, I think typically differentiates very strong senior people from kind of mid-level performance senior people.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I love all that, and I think it's so important, like having because this is a field where like things are changing fast. You're learning constantly, and a lot of times you're doing projects for like the first time for a company. Like you're solving a problem that hasn't been solved for that company. So like to your point of like the batteries included, like they get excited, they can hit the ground running, they can like take initiative and figure out how to solve a problem is so important because that is happening in most of these jobs. And so, yeah, usually, yeah, when I talk to people who are interested in this field, I'm kind of like, how do you feel about uncertainty? And like, when you don't know how to do something, do you figure it out on your own or do you wait for someone to tell you what to do? Because if you're the latter, you're not going to last you're going to like just hate this field, but you're probably not going to last very long if, you're sitting around waiting for someone to tell you what to do. Um, so yeah, it can be exciting, but also sometimes it can just be exhausting. Like
Yeah.
sometimes I'll have a day where I'm just like, can I just get a simple item on my to-do list that is straightforward and I can knock it out in an hour?
It is
Yeah,
interesting to think about balancing your energy throughout the day
yeah.
because I do the exact same thing. I like will have a big ambiguous thing that I'm honestly like not super duper looking forward to. Um, some people call that eating the frog early.
hmm
So like start with that, then I'm like, okay, I need to like regain some energy, so I'm gonna like do this analysis that I know is gonna be quick and I know how to do it. It just needs to get done. And then I'm kind of feeling better, and then I can move on to the next ambiguous thing. So that I only learned that like in the last year or so, and that has made a big difference for me.
Yeah. Or something I've done is with the big projects is like break it down into like the smallest step possible. So even just like find the data table that I need to use, you know? And I've been doing this process where like my daily to-do list, I'll chunk it out in like 30-minute chunks. And so sometimes I will like
That's
break
cool.
a step into like what can I do in 30 minutes? And that is like that step. So like find the right data source and then just like start my or even just like chunk out my CTEs. Like don't even write
Yeah,
them, just like, what is the and like and I feel like that makes it easier, but of course it takes time to like figure out those baby steps, but sometimes that it just feels so much like easier to get started when I can figure out like what is a simple 30-minute task to get this project going.
I love that.
Yeah. Um So, okay, thinking about like how things have changed. You've been leading teams in analytics for 15 years. So you were around when, data science became, the sexiest job of the 21st century, which is hilarious because I'm like, there's nothing
Yeah,
sexy about this. And then I think they came out with a follow-up in 2022, like, is it still the sexiest job? And they're like, yep, still sexy. But then I think,
I think it is.
yeah, but then
I
since
love it.
2022, it's been the whole like AI, ChatGPT, it's going to take your job. We don't need data scientists and data analysts anymore. So like, we've already kind of talked about this a bit, but what's your perspective then about how things have changed both since like 2012 when the hype train started and then even 2022 at like the peak of tech hiring and then now things I think have kind of slowed down a bit. Um, but do you feel like this is still a like exciting field to work in that you would recommend that people like pursue?
Definitely, 100%. I like can't believe I get paid to do this stuff. So like I'm a huge fanboy, but I don't know if I'm in the minority or not, but I don't know a different way to be. So I think it's amazing. And I like would go find another industry if I the day that not the day, but you know what I mean, if I stopped believing that. So I'm still a huge believer. I also don't feel like there's a prevailing sentiment in the industry that has changed. I think a lot of what you're describing of like the AI stuff since
hmm
2022 is like noise and
Yeah.
like headlines for the sake of headlines, maybe. I think, as I said before, I think, data teams and data science teams have become more established as a concept within companies. I think that's been one of the main changes even since 2012. I think it's still really exciting, but I think people know more now what to expect from data teams. I do think AI, and like just like the froth around AI is kind of consuming more of the headspace or like the airwaves maybe
hmm
since 2022, and I think that makes sense. And I think there's probably time for like data science to get a break after being in the spotlight for close to 15 years. I think for me, like still an amazing job. I don't think this
hmm
changes much for the data scientists themselves. But maybe being an AI engineer is a little bit more appealing now, much more
hmm
appealing for like people graduating from college than a data scientist. But
Yeah.
I think you should do stuff because it's exciting and it gives you energy. I think
hmm
if you're deciding what industry to go into based on the news or based on like what you think is like sounds cool to other people, I think that's tough as a young person, but I think it's misguided.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I was just talking to someone about, like, should they pursue their passions for their career? And it's like, I feel like the right career is somewhere at the intersection of like, what am I good at? What can I tolerate doing for 40 hours a week or if not enjoy? And then what is someone willing to pay me to do?
Sure.
And so, maybe, I mean, this person, their question was like, should I pursue art as a career? And it's like, well, does it fall in those three buckets? Maybe you need to adjust. But yeah, I think it's of course a balance. So for people who are interested in kind of breaking into this field, into analytics, in 2026, what advice would you have for them?
I would probably say one, like be curious, talk to people, hear about their day to day. Like I think if you reach out to someone on LinkedIn, especially if you have like something of a connection, like you went to the same college, which is how I have experienced a lot of mentoring, like when I was in school and then after school. If you have like that little degree of connection and you ask someone, genuine, like, hey, I want to hear about your experience. I'm excited. I think you'll be surprised by how many people respond to you. I love getting the mentoring outreach. I'm now like a little bit too old for that. I found like when you're like 5 to 10 years out of
Mm-hmm.
school, that's the sweet spot. But after 10, I'm getting way fewer, requests, which is fine, but it's a little bit sad. And so I think people are really excited to get that outreach. And so you would be surprised how many people are actually willing to talk to you. I think there can be a lot of intimidation. So that'd be the first thing. And then the second thing I think would be work on a real project. And you don't
Mm-hmm.
need to be at a company to work on a real project. Like Python is free.
Mm-hmm.
Like learn stuff, teach yourself, go scrape your credit card spending data, like get something and do something meaningful that will help you learn and that actually accomplishes a goal. And that's like a great like portfolio project. It
Mm-hmm.
both helps you learn and then you can also demonstrate that you're, proactive and I don't love the term self-starter, but I'm just going to say self-starter. And it's something that you can talk about that you did. Because I think sometimes when you're starting out in any career, there's a chicken and the egg problem of not having experience because so that you
Mm-hmm.
can't get a job. But the reason that you don't have experience is that you don't have a job yet. And so doing this kind of portfolio style project can showcase like your passion and then can also help you learn the ropes.
Yeah, I actually have a spreadsheet, like a budget spreadsheet that I created for myself years ago that I still use to this day, like, I don't know, 5 years running. And I had, like, I had to do a lot of, I think, Googling to figure out in Excel or in Google Sheets. I'm like, I want to do this. How do I do that? Or thinking through like the formulas, but it'll predict, based on your spending year to date, this is how much money you'll spend by the end of the year. And like in each category, this is how much money you'll have left. And it's been really helpful. But it was a great learning experience as well. So yeah, I agree.
That's
Like
great.
start with your own data. That I tell people that a lot as well. Um, okay, so let's see, getting close to the end. So I guess, is there something that you're still actively like learning or rethinking about analytics? Like, even though, you've been in this field for a long time, do you still find yourself, yeah, like rethinking things or like learning new topics that have come along that you're excited to learn?
Absolutely. I feel like I'm definitely learning stuff every day, and I'm also kind of intending to put myself in those environments. I think one thing that comes to mind for me, we talked about AI. AI would be the big one, but we talked about that.
Hmm.
One thing that comes to mind for me is like the connection between strategy and kind of goal setting and financials in analytics. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, like I found it really powerful to have those things go together
Hmm.
so that it's not like, hey, your FP&A team is projecting your financials. Look, in a fight between data science and financials, financials is always going to win. So like, don't fight it, join them.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful, especially at smaller companies. And so understanding like, hey, how do we set goals? Like it's relatively straightforward to define a metric. In my opinion, it's much more challenging to define what the goal should be and then get the stakeholder on board with committing to it.
Hmm. Hmm.
People don't
Hmm.
like committing to things
Hmm.
because then they're going to be held accountable.
Hmm. Hmm.
But if you do that, then you can get everyone kind of focusing in the same direction and you can help accelerate growth because they're going to make decisions that prioritize the outcomes that those metrics, are driving towards. And so having that holistic view of like FP&A to analytics to goal setting to how stakeholders, make decisions day to day and building a framework around that so that everyone is operating within that framework. Some people call this OKRs, but it doesn't really
Hmm.
matter what you call it. That's something I've been learning a lot about and making a lot of mistakes in, but it's also like helping us improve a ton. So that's probably the thing that I'm still learning. Superhuman before we were acquired was about 120 people. Grammarly, which acquired us and then rebranded to Superhuman, is about 1,500 people.
Hmm.
And so we're trying to do that for the first time at a 1,500 person company, and it is chaos. But we're getting
Yeah.
there. So it's good.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for the chat today. I really enjoyed our conversation. Any final thoughts or anything you want to add before we end?
No, just thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, Maggie.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.